Good afternoon, everyone. It's Friday, our Friday afternoon session of Art and Code Homemade. I'm Golan Levin, director of the Frank-Ratchye STUDIO for Creative Inquiry at Carnegie Mellon and director of the Art and Code Festival. And it's my pleasure to introduce the beginning of our Friday afternoon session. We're going to have three presentations by Ari Melenciano, Sarah Rosalina Brady, and Eiman Yay. And just another quick announcement, there has been, unfortunately, a cancellation at 5:30 this afternoon. Olivia Michaela Ross has had to cancel. We've just learned. So there will be a gap at 5:30. We'll talk more about that when we do the evening session. But we will still have Leah Beakley and Naniba Chacon at 5 o'clock. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce Ari Melenciano, who is an artist, designer, creative technologist, researcher, and educator, whose research combines approaches from human-computer interaction, Afrocentric design practices, and experimental pedagogy. She is the founder of Afrotectopia, a social institution fostering interdisciplinary innovation at the intersections of art, design, technology, Black culture, and activism. And she currently teaches creative technology and counterculture at NYU and Pratt. Ari Melenciano.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Very excited to be here. And I will talk quickly because I usually put in too many slides in my presentations. I know we're on a quick time span. So I'll be talking about electromedia design and culture, which is where a lot of my work lies. So again, I'm Ari Melenciano, and I'm at the core of who I am as far as my practice. I've always identified as an artist and have found that design and creative technology are really great vehicles for me to use to continue expanding the possibilities of art. And a lot of my work is built off of research. So I'm constantly engaging in research and studying different facets of the world. I often turn all of this work into classroom environments. So I teach a lot at different universities. And in being a teacher, I feel like I'm always fortunate enough to be a student to continue to learn from the students that I have. So with my electromedia practice, it spans a lot of different mediums, but it generally started from a project called Ojo Oro, which I created while a graduate student at NYU's Interactive Telecommunications program. And this was a dream project for me because I grew up as someone that loved photography and taking pictures and documenting moments, but also having a really beautiful experience with digital photography, but an even more beautiful experience with analog photography. And I wanted to create something that kind of blended both of those worlds. So in being someone that just loved the aesthetics of different cameras, especially film cameras, I feel like there's a lot more attention to the craft and the design of them versus digital cameras at the time. Now digital cameras are trying to mimic the aesthetics of a film camera, but at the time they were like these kind of bulky machines. And so I wanted to create something that kind of had the best of both worlds in that it was operated digitally, but it mimicked the film-like experience. So with this camera, people would use it, it would take pictures, digital pictures, and then it was also thinking about fashion of it being a sort of wearable device. You're wearing it around your neck, so why not have it be something that's complementary to your outfit? And then these are the different photos that it would take. So it's digital, but it's randomly applying film-like filters onto the photos to create this sort of distortion and colorfulness. And that's where the name Ojo Oro comes from, which is Spanish for golden eye. It's meant to be a tool that allows you to realize your artistry in a way where you're not scared of the end result. There's no mistake or error. It's purely just everything that comes out of it is something to be treasured. And so then I continued expanding on that work and creating sound sculptures and being really excited about how music could be created in new forms. And so I would create these sculptures that would allow people to engage them and turn different knobs, and that would then change the frequency or other forms. And so that continued to expand in the form of a series of work. One more recent series of work or body of work as far as sound sculptures is in the name of Electro Negro Synesthesia. So this is a compilation of different sound sculptures that are all rooted in Black culture artifacts. And so being obviously a Black person and loving Black culture and all the different artifacts that we have in it, but also very attentive to the fact that a lot of different cultural artifacts, Black culture artifacts, when worn on Black bodies, have a negative stigma to them, and they're seen as something negative stereotypically or unprofessional or whatever it is. Specifically when worn on a Black body, but when worn on other bodies, it seems as trendy or cool. So for me, I'm thinking a lot about what is the future of Black culture outside of the white gaze, and it allows where it's able to express itself and define itself on its own terms. So through this, I've created these sound sculptures where I'm using these different cultural artifacts that have such negative stigmas, but recontextualizing them and placing them in a sort of future. Whereas people engage with them and their sound interactive, they then are able to enter this new world. So in touching things like the hair rollers or the do-rag or the bamboo earrings, you hear new sounds, or even in touching the braids, you hear it then plays sounds in response to it. And I'm also thinking about, there's this notion that you should never touch a Black woman's hair or a Black person's hair, period. It can often be a very degrading act. But I'm thinking, what if it wasn't because it was degrading, but more of it was because, the being, the Black being is too magical to touch. But if you do touch it, you're entering this new world. So in creating this artifact, I was exploring that. And then as you change the different Afro picks, it's not a sound tool. It's actually, I've embedded the sort of digital DNA inside of each Afro pick, so that as you change the Afro picks on that bed, it then changes the visuals that would be projected on the wall. Another more recent project is Metamorphosis. I created this during the summer, and just hearing the sounds of protest and nonstop all throughout the summer, and wondering what is everything that we're going through doing to our bodies. And so thinking a lot about healing modalities and digital healing modalities, with us being in a remote era. So how the effects and turmoil affect, how turmoil and pain affect our body, thinking about that scientifically and spiritually. And so I wanted to create a space. I was also thinking about epigenetics, of being a being. Epigenetics is an experience that your body has without you physically having it. It's an ancestral sort of experience that you have that's embedded within you. And so when we're constantly going through these tragic experiences, that's altering the way that we navigate through the world in our DNA. So I wanted to think of, is it possible to have a reversal of those negative epigenetics and create a positive epigenetics, and do that through sound and color? So with this, called Metamorphosis.fm, and that it's a change, it's a larger change within our DNA structure through frequency, and the modulation of frequency creates this experience where as you enter this space and listening to different sounds that tie directly to different energy chakras, those would then potentially do some sort of reversal of the negative epigenetics. And so I did a lot of research in studying sound and how that impacts the body, and studying its relation to different chakras or energy centers. And then also had known about African drum pattern music, and that having been a tool to carry Black people and African people through Pan-African revolutions through drum sounds. So I wanted to blend both of those to create this audio-visual experience. And so thinking also about the architecture of the space and moving through it, and the psychogeography, and it curved walls allow for relaxation and calmness. And so using those tactics inside of the space, and then in being a sound artist, creating creating all the music and blending it all together and producing it to create this environment, which I designed in Cinema 4D, and then exported it into a web VR environment, where also thinking about, again, psychogeography of higher ceilings. These are things that we often experience when we're in a cathedral or a space of such significance. So also placing that inside of this space, if you feel like you're in a place that's really important, and then as you navigate through it, you feel like this cyclical kind of relationship between you and the sound and the environment as you move through and enter these different sphere areas. And then each section has its own music that's being played in that area alone. And each of those areas are designated for each of the different energy centers. And so in continuing this, I've been exploring a lot about creating in web VR and in virtual environments. And this is a more recent project that I'm still developing, that I'm presenting at Sundance this year in their online environment, and it's called An Alchemy of Celestial Florilegia. And so this is thinking about time being a very spherical thing. It exists, and there are alternate realities, and this idea of existentialism, and what does it mean to exist? What does it mean to understand language outside of the written or oral kind of passage of language? And so it's a huge montage of just generally like a surrealist and existentialist kind of understanding of the world. And so I'm going to move even quicker through this research and pedagogy so that we can go into, and then go into Afroditopia so that we can go into a Q&A. So as I mentioned, a lot of my work is built off of research, and I really enjoy researching and understanding what people have done in the past, and using that as a tool to designing futures. So a lot of my work is very interdisciplinary, which I found a lot of a similar relationship in my work as people like Stuart Brand and Victor Papanek have had in their own work, of being very whole system thinking, of not focusing strictly on one facet of life, but thinking about a lot of different parts of the world and how they all have a relationship between each other. So things like the Whole Earth Catalog and Victor Papanek's work on politics with design have been really great resources for me. And oftentimes when I'm engaging in this research on omni-specialized design, I'm outputting it in the form of a presentation like this, where I'll talk about a lot of the different areas that I've explored and how I'm bringing them all together. Or they will take in the form of courses. So I design courses at NYU and teach them. And a few of them have been The Revolution Will Be Digitized, where we're thinking about technology, but in a holistic and comprehensive form, where it's not just about computer science, but it's about economics and sociology and public policy and ecology and media and military. Or with designing club culture, which is kind of the flip side of creative technology or electromedia, and that it's not entirely about the social impacts of tech in a negative kind of way, but more of like what has been allowed to exist because we have had access to electromedia. So how counterculture movements have used technology through various forms to create these kind of disco scenes, and people have been able to champion and realize their own kind of utopias within these spaces. And a more recent course that I'm teaching is called Afro-Techtopian Ecologies, which is also a very interdisciplinary kind of approach of combining a lot of different areas of research that I've been exploring and kind of putting them all together into a course where we're understanding so many different aspects of the world, but within a few weeks. And so then then also the research also takes forms in writing essays. So I'll publish essays online about things like radical technoculture, racial equity, or building a museum 350 years in the future, or a whole essay on omni-specialization in design for beautiful futures. And so what I've been working on, and what I've had the support over the past summer with IBEAM as a fellow, and now going into this new year with the support from Onyx and their new kind of new media virtual reality kind of space and membership kind of thing with the new museum, is thinking of how can I translate all of this research into a virtual environment where I'm thinking about the architecture, not only information architecture, but also the architectural kind of renderings of a space in a digital space. So thinking about the internet, not so much as a tool, it's a linear tool if you get from point A to point B, but moving away from that and allowing for spontaneity and exploration, and not as a linear tool, but an explorative tool. And so as you enter this space, you would then find different portals that are leading you to environments that have information on a variety of different ideas, like quantum mechanics and sound design, or environmentalism and Dadaism. And so that's a more recent work that I'm building out and working on. But I'm also, as the founder of Afro-Techtopia, thinking a lot about not only virtual digital environments, but also communities and people, and how we can create spaces that cultivate imagination and creativity and stimulation, artistic stimulation and design stimulation. And so Afro-Techtopia has taken the form of a lot of different things. It started off as a new media festival, and it's expanded. It started as a new media festival. I was a graduate student. I created it there, and it has expanded into being an alternative adult school. So last year we held classes, 10 different classes hosted by Verizon Media. We also had a more recent conference or more recent festival we had last year at Google. And this year we're going to have this year in the midst of a 4-week-long alternative adult school called Fractal FET, which is thinking a lot about a whole bunch of ideas around art, design, Black culture, technology, and activism. And we also just wrapped up an international cohort fellowship where we were thinking about ways that we can use technology and design and art to mitigate racial disparities and create these new worlds. And so with Fractal FET, which is happening right now, we have 20 different amazing and brilliant Black presenters and Pan-African presenters, and the space is open exclusively to Black and Pan-African people, where we're just giving each other the space to explore process and understanding, the behind the scenes for different creators and the things that they're thinking about, and have this kind of open dialogue so that we can get to know each other and build with one another and explore new possibilities. And so generally the work with Afrotectopia has just been to build a micro community of imaginative innovators. So it's really important for us to have spaces where we can come together and explore and imagine and to collaboratively develop healthy Black futures where we're not leaving that responsibility to other people, but we're taking the agency within our own hands and designing it for ourselves. And to share all of our research is really about being as open source as possible and making sure that anyone that doesn't have access to our space or community in person or virtual can at least have access to the work that we're building. And the biggest and the most important thing has been to plant seeds for radical Black imagination. So how can we create spaces for people to just imagine and dream and place themselves in the future and work backwards from there, and create new forms and really lean into their agency. So I think I actually talked a little too fast. I was worried about time, but that's where I am. So we can maybe have a longer time for Q&A.
Hi, Adi. Thank you so much.
Mhm.
This is great. We do have probably 5 to 10 minutes for Q&A. So I'll pull from the Discord, juggling a couple computers here.
Yeah.
But maybe the first question I have for you just is to think about in the festival Art and Code Homemade, what we were thinking of by homemade, and the curatorial advisors were also talking to me about this, was not just necessarily homemade like apple pie or something like this, but really that one would be making technologies for different audiences, perhaps in gift cultures, or technologies that one would make for oneself, one's friends, one's family, one's community, maybe even one's ancestors. And I wonder if you could speak to that notion of who the technologies are for when you think about, in your thinking about Afrotectopia, and it's trying to sort of instill or create a space for Black technological imagination. Is this about, helping create Black innovators who are going to make technologies that are going to be mass produced, or is it about sort of helping people create technologies for themselves and their friends and family, or is it sort of all of that? How do you imagine? Yeah, who consumes and produces the technologies from these?
Yeah, I think it's really also one thing that I started off the fellowship with, and you see the fellows in the lower right corner. It was grounding the work and making sure that they understand what Afrotopia stands for, which is one that we understand that and we believe that technology is not technology is merely an extension of human capability. So I think we definitely need to get away from this idea that technology is synonymous with computing and digitality, like it has to be in this electric form, but it's simply understanding that technology has always existed around us. And it's something that's been innate in things like ancestral intelligence and the way that indigenous people have operated with the land and worked with the land. So I think for one, it's making sure that it's creating a community that understands their capability and agency and understands that the way that their ancestors have practiced all along have been what we've needed for technology in general and going forward. But it's also a space where we're thinking a lot about not assuming that Blackness is a monolith, because as you can see with the fellows here, the fellows were coming from all over the world for one, and they have a lot of different ethnicities. So one of them was Haitian, another is French, another is Ghanaian, like they're coming from all over. And though we have this shared idea of an identity of Blackness, we have very different understandings of what Blackness means and the ways that we engage and practice with it. So it's also creating that kind of environment. Yeah, I think who's it for? It's really just for people that are interested in being curious and exploring and realizing new potentials and ways to express themselves digitally if they want to, or also outside of digital forms. But it's really just for people that are just curious and want to learn more about the world.
Another question coming from the chat is, do you have places that you think would be most impactful to share this work, or that you fantasize about, like the goal, like the holy grail would be to present this work? The question says, like, would X audience really get it, or audience Y at this place should really be experiencing this? Do you have?
I don't think I've ever been asked that kind of question. Because I present these in different kind of form, like all different kind of spaces. I think I think the goal for me, like what I would love to do in presenting the work of Aftertopia is to present it to schools that are
Mhm.
predominantly Black, like like elementary schools and middle schools and high schools that are predominantly Black in their population. I think that excites me the most. Oftentimes, this work I'm presenting in areas that are like more predominantly white or something else. So I think for me, that would, because that's why this was created. I created this because I grew up as someone that loved technology, but was never a technologist. It was more of an end user. So I never saw myself in this space at all. So this was created because we need to be able to see each other, and we need to know that these are things that we're capable of doing. And if we had access to it, these are things that we would be doing. So just being able to see each other is the most important part of it.
Yeah, something I've told the speakers is, to give the talk that you would like to see.
Yeah.
Um, it's been said, you can't be it if you don't see it. And that can mean a lot of things. In one case, it's simply like the kind of way that you work across so many different disciplines.
Mhm.
I've mentioned several times in the festival, like this permission to be hybrid is
Yeah.
so latent and embedded in your work. And to see, of course, uh, many different kinds of approaches to technology being done here as well. There's a question on the chat about what's in. This is less about Afrotopia and more about like the physical things that you've shown. What's informing the aesthetic choices you've made in your physical work? There's a question about like the someone says, I'd like to hear more about the influences and intentions behind the beautiful visual design language that you have across your work. Where have you drawn from to make these?
Um, I think, well, thank you. It's a kind question. I think I'm not sure where it comes from. I remember being in art school in undergrad, and I was always the only one that was using a lot of color, and everyone else was kind of using these minimal monochromatic kind of color palettes. And just having conversations with other people, I realized, and even just with my family, I realized that maybe is something that's more Caribbean or whatever it is. Like my family is from the Caribbean. I'm Dominican American. So it could be that. Maybe it's just kind of like a cultural thing that just kind of comes in, because for me, color is really important in creating a space that just feels vibrant. I think allows people to feel very excited. But yeah, I don't know where the other parts come in. I think it's also just like this ancestral intelligence again of like the things that you kind of do, which is it's just stuff that it's just in your DNA, I guess. And for me, patterns are really important. I love to blend together different patterned aesthetics and create these new shapes and balance between complexity and kind of simplicity. So I don't know. I think it's kind of a mix of that, of just color and patterns are really important to me.
I think this will probably be our last question. It's again from the Discord. Oh, there's a couple, but this one is where and when, or where and or when will there be opportunities to experience the Metamorphosis virtual space? And also, following on that, did you incorporate any of the thinking of the work of Dr. Nadine Burke Harris on ACES, which is Adverse Childhood Experiences?
No, but I'm gonna write that name down. That sounds really interesting.
It's in the
Nadine.
it's in the chat as well. So, is there a plan to exhibit or for people to experience the Metamorphosis virtual space?
I would, it's live now. You could go to metamorphosis.fm and you'll be able to move through the space. But in just being asked that question, I've never really thought about exhibiting it outside of the website, but I think that would
Mhm.
be a really, really, really cool opportunity.
And who are some people uh, in who are working on technology for activism or just other technological approaches in terms of the way that you think are aligned with that you are intensely interested in or that you feel aligned with, or whose work you admire and that we should look into? Do you want to give shout outs to anyone?
Oh, there's so many. There's every speaker that's presenting at Fractal FET. You could look at that. And yesterday we had Ash Bacchus Clark, and the day before that we had Onyx Ashanti.
Mhm.
So yeah, you could definitely look at that lineup and find a lot of them.
Thank you so much for sharing your energy and work and objectives with us, Ari. It's really inspirational and it's really important work for this kind of thing to happen and for people to see it. It's lovely seeing you again, and I hope you get to enjoy some more of the festival too.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Thanks. Okay. Um, we're going to take a quick break, and in at 2 o'clock, we will have Sarah Rosalina Brady. So we'll see you all in a few minutes. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Golan Levin, director of the Art and Code Festival, and we are thrilled to be in the middle of our Friday afternoon session. And I'm going to introduce our next speaker, who is Sarah Rosalina Brady. Sarah Rosalina Brady is an interdisciplinary artist and researcher based in Los Angeles. Her work deconstructs technology with material interventions, creating new narratives for hybrid objects that draw from AI, aerospace technologies, and decolonial posthumanism, indigenous scholarship, and mentorship in STEAM. Sarah is an assistant professor of computational craft and haptic media at UC Santa Barbara. Please welcome Sarah Rosalina Brady.
Hello, thank you. Keku, my name is Sarah Rosalina, and I just wanted to take a moment to thank Golan and the Studio for Creative Inquiry and Carnegie Mellon University for this invitation to talk about my work, and also just to breathe. This past few weeks of the year have been very intense, and I just wanted to start off that talk by acknowledging and creating space for this moment. And it's also a really interesting time to make work for someone who likes to deconstruct or materialize things that the machines see. So much of this talk is going to be focused on materializing pixels from a technological remove, and talk about my history with that. And especially with the pandemic, remote sensing through our devices have replaced our physical interactions. In many ways, scaling from these distance proximities and resolutions have become part of our everyday life, but yet we forget where it comes from and all the boundaries and borders that were also trained from hundreds of years of imperialism forced by technology. So as for my background, how I became an interdisciplinary artist and researcher is very much based in Los Angeles, where I grew up. I came from two very different worlds. My grandfather, Brady, was an aerospace engineer and astrophysicist for JPL, and started at the early days at Caltech. Right across the way, I was also raised by my grandmother, who came to Los Angeles as a domestic laborer, and taught me Huichol weaving from a very early age, which is tradition that's passed from grandmother to granddaughter. I'm also Laguna Pueblo, and have been working between myself being born in Los Angeles and geopolitics. It was a very interesting, I had an interesting childhood because my grandparents mostly raised me because of conflicts between my families. So it really, I've always kind of seen myself as a perfect representative of how hybrids can exist. And because I've never really fit in one box, let's put it that way. And for me, it really inspired me because, my grandfather, worked along with computers when they were people, and wrote a lot of spacecraft trajectories through tables and equations. In many ways, I always saw that in relation to patterning when I would be on my backstrap loom or when I'd be beating something. And this really made an impact on how I see the world, but not only how I see it, but how machines function and machines view things. And that was a very large part of me growing up, witnessing, our first images coming back from Saturn. And I remember, when these images came pixel by pixel through mission control where my grandfather worked. And that really stood out to me, how the machine sees and understands things, because many ways you can break it down into woven form. Pixels is an ancient pixel-based technology, but there's a lot of control and power at play that we forget, and how its role has played a part in colonialism. And how we're able to look into deep space and have these images like the black hole arrive. This was done by a team of researchers led by Katie Bauman, who's now at Caltech, by weaving 8 event horizon telescopes using the world as a camera. So here we are again, looking deeper into space, and using algorithms, patterning as a way to view, but now becoming much more advanced. And the more and more we become more reliant on machines, we also have to remember our past, and what that cultural impact makes upon that within our cosmologies, because so much of what we think and we know of our reality has been manipulated by technology, which stems from the military industrial complex, you know, massive tech corporations. And we have to be mindful of that because it's also embedded in the code. For example, you know, how we see the Earth, you know, even stems from our first image of when we first saw ourselves in 1946 by strapping a camera to a German V-2 rocket, which was captured by the Americans after World War II, and was launched with American scientists and former Nazi scientists from the rocket program. This is part of our history. And that really just still shapes how we see things. And, you know, what happens when you introduce the machine to see other things? So I, at that point, was interested in studying, you know, not only what I could train the machine on, but, you know, how could we exit that pattern, which I'm going to be talking a little bit later. I've been doing a lot of research on a particular design that focuses on exiting. But this was a AI neural network that I trained on images of the black hole and the blue marble, and was really interested how can we feed it into itself, and you know, where is the exit point when we're at a point where so much of what we're being tracked, surveillance, seen, and so much of that is embedded in our knowledge, and knowledge has, you know, in many ways been a way to control the way we think, and technology and science has, you know, in many ways been on the forefront. So this in mind, I was interested in, you know, using it also as a weaving pattern for a mechanical jacquard loom. Like many people here, I'm sure, we all know that the first computer algorithm that was written was by Ada Lovelace, by witnessing the jacquard's ability to weave intricate flowers and leaves. In many ways, you know, bridging the gap between, you know, the very first, you know, moments where we were able to produce images on the loom through algorithms to, you know, to this point where we're, you know, machines are seeing, understanding, and, you know, making choices, manipulating us all the time. And what does this mean when we're now, you know, looking out into space? And that's something that I really wanted to focus on this talk between, you know, what's happening on Earth and what we're projecting into space, and how do we change that, change our trajectories and exit them by reflecting on the past. And how do we exit this? And also, where are the entrance and exit points for us to think about these objects through our human interactions? And that's something I feel like is really important when comparing, you know, things that are digitally made and handmade, is this blurring between, you know, human and the non-human. Could there be something in between? But what does that mean when, you know, for me, it's always been a challenge because, you know, colonialism and commodity is such a big part of technology and who it exploits. And this is, you know, stemmed from a lot of research that I've done in the past. I've always been really interested in how AI or the machine sees language, because in many ways the machine is biased because it's written in a language that has a very particular point of view. So this was a project I did in 2017 called Reformation of 50,000 Letters, where I was really interested in to see what a sketch RNN model how it would see or see language, and what would happen if it was forced to write language for over 3 months. And seeing, you know, you can kind of see them dance in between latent space and interpolation here, and how they're shaping and shifting over time. But, you know, for me, I was interested also in a process of the machine, you know, having to write something that it's normally not used to, and also viewing it, you know, because also from a stance that, you know, programming in some ways is forgetting. So how do we force the machine to do things that were, you know, it's being introduced to things that it maybe should have known, including a lot of letter forms that, you know, could, many ways could possibly be extinct, just because as we keep growing with technology, we're becoming much more homogeneous. So how do we introduce that? So these were some, I blew up some of the letter forms on a CNC machine. So I just directly outputted it and had the robotic arm carve it out. So these are about 3 feet by 5 feet. And, blowing them up, I was really interested in also viewing them in many ways, almost as like a memorial or a monument to what the machine learned, and also all the artifacts that are embedded in it, through written gesture, typography choices, and also interested in making new patterns out of them and playing with materials. So these were cast in porcelain, and was interested in making new patterns out of them, and also making them handmade. So these are done with just me trying to reenact the form by hand. And working with clay and machines, I went back to JPL, my roots, and became very, very fascinated in the role of clay in the future. So here I am, I'm actually holding a soil sample tube that is on Perseverance that's about to land on Mars. And talking to people at JPL and understanding how these machines work when they're trained on all this extractive technology, and how they're going to be the next mediator of forms in many ways. So this is JPL's fabrication facility where they built Perseverance and the Mars sample tube. And I've just been finding it so interesting because so much of what those machines are trained on are actually based in the Southwest. So for example, I've been making a lot of work with Martian soil simulant, which is actually comes from a desert in Mojave, and there's also one that's in a desert fairly close to Flagstaff. And the main component of it is having that rich iron oxide that gives it that red color. But I find it's really interesting that JPL scientists and these people are trying to like mimic the soil, and in doing so, what that actually means. And then training even more satellites that are viewing and tracking these spaces from above, which they're also being trained on like I mentioned, borders and boundaries that are rooted in colonialism. Like what who has access to these satellites, and what does that mean when you collaborate with a machine who's taking that much data information and make something different, or you're being really critical about it? What happens when you materialize it? And the main important thing is how much of that is driven by these anxieties of climate change. Most importantly, water. And for me, I've been really interested in the colors, red and blue, because, the red planet and the blue planet, there's this tension between the desertification of our blue planet and then colonizing the red planet to simulate the blue. So there's this tension between red and blue because so much of that is better in water and climate. And that's what, the future is going to be about. And, how when all these people are pushing and projecting so much above us, how can we also look again at that, at ourselves, especially in the past, of where these technologies come from. So with the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, it's been taking thousands of images of Mars for the past 15 years, in many ways stitching them together. I used a large sample data of all their ice imagery to create these kind of like these AI envisioned landscapes, but really interested in tracing the blue, because so much of that is ice and potential clay, which scientists are really interested in, because if there's clay, that means there's water. And if there's water, there's some type of habitability, but they're also really interested in it as a building material. And then also, put this through a mechanical Jacquard loom. And also looking, where's the exit point? you know, how you know, red and blue shifts within the pixels, you know, which has been trained on, you know, billions of years of climate, you know, on Earth and on Mars, and how do the machines view color in this way when it is so linked to land and access, and you know, with machines, you know, completely mediating, controlling these situations and circumstances, and also what's underneath these things. So I have always been really fascinated by, you know, when leaving Earth and being beyond the human, because in space, you know, above, below, in many ways dissolves. And, you know, and so how could you also view this textile, you know, from the front and from the back, and what's underneath, I find really interesting. You know, because so much of, you know, what's above and below can be broken down into actual compounds and pigments, which I've been, you know, spending a lot of time doing at the Smithsonian National Museum of the American Indian. Spending a lot of time on studying pottery, materials of pottery, on this Laguna Pueblo pot, and most importantly, I've been really studying this design called the exit spirit line. And I've been researching it also from the form of an exit point, because in many ways, just like when you make something with the machine, the blurring between human and non-human, living, non-living becomes blurred. But that's a concept that's very traditional in a lot of Japanese cultures, and most importantly, indigenous cultures, is this idea that things are embedded with spirit, things are alive. And, you know, that I've been really interested in. Not only from viewing it from pottery, but also how do we exit, you know, museums and how things are archived, because you can also view these objects as pixels in a vast matrix. You know, where does the design, you know, start and end, and how do we exit them? And with this in mind, that's where I've been kind of going back to, you know, understanding, you know, different design choices, and figuring out ways that we can strategize ways to think differently about technology, because, you know, like I mentioned, you know, so much of technology is the next mediator of forms. So this is a piece that I made with the Mars regolith simulant. So I made a clay, used the simulant and mixed a little bit of bentonite clay, put it in a pug mill, made a mixture, and, you know, put it up to a ceramic 3D printer, trained on architecture software that many of these rovers and drones are also trained with, to build habitats. So if you actually Google NASA Habitat Challenge, they do this every year, because, you know, NASA and, you know, scientists know the best way to build a structure on another planet is to use the native material that's there, which is, I find, again, hilarious, because it's like indigenous people have been doing this for, you know, thousands and thousands of years. And it's, you know, this idea of, you know, us wanting to be sustainable on another planet when we could be sustainable on Earth. There's still like some disconnect. So, and also, with my designs, been interested again thinking about how do we exit these patterns, and very much inspired by the black hole, and you know, thinking about entrance points, exit points, gravity, how things flow, and, you know, what it means to actually break down it to its, you know, core level, not only for what, you know, it looks and materializes, but how does it exist, you know, through machines and archived, and how that can be broken down into numbers and patterns, and how do we break, you know, a lot of these borders through, you know, art and different narratives and conversations that aren't necessarily one or the other, and that, you know, so much of, like I mentioned, like my research and my work kind of grapples with that, being multiracial, and trying to, you know, work with technology while still acknowledging its role in the past and coming to terms with that. because again, so much of what's happening on Earth can be played out in space. Like like, and it really goes down to climate change and how we understand our environment and our surroundings, because we cannot go to another planet and be reliant on technological expertise to terraform it or to make it habitable. We need to focus on where we're at right now. And I just wanted to stop with that, and thank you so much. If you want to reach out, I'm at UC Santa Barbara, and thank you.
Thank you, Sarah, so much for this talk. A lot of really amazing ideas here. Climate change on Earth is this incredible catastrophe that weighs on our minds. And I don't know if climate change on Mars is something that we worry about. Colonialism within the, our own Earth displaces people who were there but are being ignored. Do we have the same, or should we have the same guilt about colonizing Mars? As you said, if there's a notion that there's a spirit there, is it okay to just do what we want to with it? But the questions that are arising, first of all, are you collaborating with JPL or just in conversation with them through your work?
So I'm in conversation with them with my work. My relation to JPL is I actually got the LACMA Art Tech Lab grant 2 years ago. And when I actually gave my talk there, someone who worked on mission control with my grandfather ended up going to that talk. And so he's been my he's been my backdoor to go through there. And it's interesting because and that's the thing I think it's so interesting about these people is they think 30, 40 years ahead. That's what my grandfather had to do with Voyager. Like, what is the actual implications of putting machines outside of Earth for that long, and what will happen? And we have to seriously think about the implications of what our technology is doing 30, 40 years ahead, because right now, so much of that is focused on space, and which is
7 generations
ahead,
right?
I find it's absolutely absurd because we're not built to go to space. And we are built to live on Earth, and we should be focusing so much on Earth. So I'm really interested in kind of like, using a lot of that narrative that's put back in space almost as a mirror to, look back at how we view our technology now. And the pandemic is like made it even more apparent for me because, this is all remote sensing. I could be in another planet right now.
Your observation that that sustainable design is this obvious consideration for working on Mars, but something we just completely overlook when we think about working here on the planet that we actually live on, was really poignant to me. And in the chat, someone remarked, this quote, "I've always shirked from science around space stuff because I feel you have to collaborate with so many other systems and people and governments to do stuff." So it's amazing, people who can kind of rock through it and get cool stuff done. And was wondering how you sort of navigate the relationship between being critical and collaborating or conversing with institutions that don't always have the same perspective you do.
Oh, I've had big fallouts. I had a big fallout with Google. I'll tell you a story. So actually, when I was doing my research at NMAI, I was really interested in, understanding how machines view archives in a museum. And had a huge, Google was more interested in, supporting the project in terms of making, some like a commodity, something that was based with their neural network, but have zero accountability for what their networks do. And, mostly, dealing with like intellectual property and so many things. And, I really had like a full mental crisis, working with a lot of these machines because you're at the mercy of their absolute will to not hold themselves accountable for what's happening in terms of bias, in terms of how machines view people. So much of that is subject to skin tone still, and it really is an amplifier. And I feel like the past 2 weeks has really made it really obvious how machines are really amplifying a lot of the injustice that are here. So even though, I make things and have, work with technology that in many ways is, in conflict and contradictory, I think it's also very important to do because it can exist in conflict, because that's just where we are as a species. It's just very complex. I always feel in conflicts as a multiracial person. So that's something I feel, comfort in. And I kind of work with my work in layers like that.
Yeah, your work is aimed right at the heart of the conflict. It's great. Thank you so much, Sarah. We are going to pause here. In 5 minutes, we will hear a presentation from Professor Eiman Yay, my colleague at Carnegie Mellon. So we will see you at 2:30 Eastern Time in about 5 minutes when we pick up Eiman's talk. Thank you so much, Sarah, for your presentation, and we'll
Thank
see
you.
everyone soon. Bye. Welcome back, everyone, to the final presentation of our Friday afternoon session. There is, of course, a Friday evening session, which will start at 5 o'clock, I believe. But for now, we would like to, it's our great pleasure to introduce Eiman Yay. Eiman Yay is an interdisciplinary and project-based artist working in sculpture, installation, and participatory events, especially involving the innovative use of paper and printing. Eiman is my colleague here at Carnegie Mellon, and she is currently an assistant professor at Carnegie Mellon University School of Art. Everyone, Eiman Yay.
Hi, thank you so much. So my name is Eiman. I consider myself a project-based artist. I get sort of really obsessed with making these very one-to-one paper replicas of different objects I find in the world. And in this presentation, I'm going to talk about a couple larger projects, as well as to give some insight about what it is that draws me to whatever it is that I'm making a replica of. And so why paper? I think of paper as like the OG, like original technology that changed the world. So along with the development of the written language, paper, printing, and printing is my area of focus within CMU. Those things were about humans wanting to leave record and leave their stories and spread it to as many people as possible. And there's something about that that's unique to our species, a desire to communicate far beyond the immediate people in our vicinity. And so that is one of the main reasons why I'm so in love with paper and printing, this humble material that we now think of as nothing, a scrap piece of paper. We don't even need it. We're moving to a post-paper world, is also the paper that is like the oldest record and the oldest archive of the entire sort of human story. So all of my sculptures are unified by that they're almost 99.9% just paper with different methods of printing, and they're all handmade. And so the smallest sculpture that I've ever made is this stink bug. And I think a lot about scale and how the smallest things can take up space. So this was a copy of a stink bug that actually was in a white installation of mine. And I had to make a copy of it. And it actually traveled to the Smithsonian Natural History Museum in Washington, D.C., where I coerced my mother, who's a volunteer there, to put it in the collections. And the largest sculpture I've ever made is this 17-foot long paper black I-beam that matched another I-beam that was in a gallery space here in Pittsburgh. And even though this is the largest sculpture I've ever made, and that these I-beams actually function in the space to hold it up, nobody could see it. And so I spent the entire art opening protecting the I-beam from being smashed by all of the visitors. And so that's sort of the range of objects that I am in love with. I think maybe a sculpture that best illustrates this idea of humble things taking up bigger space and bigger value in the world is something like this. This is a Pittsburgh parking chair. And the idea that a chair, if put in a certain space, can take the importance of a car, which has a clear value and a clear usage factor. And so I am really interested in the idea of usage and how value is invested by like the story behind the object or the labor in making the object. Other things that really sort of illustrate that to me are electrical conduits and wires, and how around buildings and how people will paint them to hide them, that they have such a use, but they're not valued sort of like aesthetically in the space. So I love that. This is at the Asian Art Museum, that they have armatures protecting the precious sort of ceramic work, and someone's job is to paint them so they disappear and that you can't see them from earthquakes. And I love that function, right? Like the function of something versus the like lack of function of art is interesting to me. So I wish my art was as good as this like painted armature. When I look at art and photos of art in museums or on Instagram or on people's websites, I can't help but notice that sharing the space often are outlets. And this idea that, again, the outlet is so ubiquitous and so necessary. It's part of building code. It's the only way that we can charge things and light things up and have a space be useful. And it's always sort of alongside these precious artworks that don't have a utility value other than like catalysts of thinking or things to sort of formal objects to look at. And so once you start seeing the outlets, you can't stop seeing them. an older work is Paper Phone Jack, a sculpture for not working, which is a downloadable project. I have a lot of downloadable practice where people can download and make their own paper sculptures. So I love the phone jack in that it was a technology that made it, that was in every single house and every building, and now is rarely used. And so they're just these like vestigial objects on walls. And my love of outlets eventually bled into this idea that everyone needs an iPhone charger and that we're so sort of connected to these devices and we need to be charged, which built up into this large installation of about 300 paper outlets and iPhone chargers. And my big exciting news with this is that this was actually a commission for the Facebook Oculus building here in Pittsburgh. And so this building that is made to sort of a think tank of creating the cutting edge sort of technology on virtual reality and augmented reality is actually hosting all of these sort of useless outlets. And then finally, the biggest exciting point of that is that they had to put a sign up on the space to urge their staff to not charge anywhere near the art. So I love the usefulness becoming unuseful, becoming valuable because of the labor becoming art. And of course, a friend of mine's daughter loved the sculpture and decided to make this paper laptop and phone laptop outlet and external hard drive as a gift. And we ended up doing a trade where I traded her one of the sculptures. And that is sort of my last point with paper, is that it is the material of childhood, that children just make what they want. And that's that imagination and play is so exciting. So one of the first works I ever did in this way of thinking is a make your own downloadable paper mahjong set. So you can build this set entirely for free if you download the PDF and commit yourself to 30 or 40 hours of making. The idea being that the value is entirely in your labor. And this project is over a decade old, but just a few months ago, a young man in India actually emailed me during quarantine. He saw the paper mahjong project online, and he has been really interested in learning how to play mahjong, unable to find it in his town, found my website, found the PDF, downloaded it, and made it, and sent me this email and sent me all of these pictures of how this sort of PDF became an actual set in his home. And so this is his built set. And that's him. And so that was a little bit of magic of this idea of play and exchange and just putting these files out there into the world. Another recent project is at CMU in the storage closet in the printmaking area. I found this film strip box set. Now this box set is 2 film strips and 2 cassettes about paper and printing. It was published in 1983. The university bought it in 1987, and they spent almost $200 on this box set, and it was never used. I mean, the cassettes were wound so tight, the film canisters weren't open. It even included the original receipts. And I was so tickled by this because I love, archive history. Obviously, I love books, and I love that moment where in technology where they thought like the film strip is going to be this innovative way where we can talk about paper and printing, and not in this boring book way, but in this exciting like multimedia way. And you had to have all this other equipment to share the information. And so I knew I had to make a paper copy of this, and I got invited to do a residency at Women's Studio Workshop to produce this into a large edition artist book. And to do it, I used every single tool in the printmaking trade. So there's silver foil, embossing, there's handmade paper to look like foam that was die cut on a letterpress, hand built foam inserts. Each cassette was built by hand, screen printed with the labels. Copies of the film canisters. I had to make a copy of this beautiful receipt. So actually each of the dot matrix paper is like hand perforated and the holes are cut. And this is the final box set. You can see the original on the left and my artist book on the right. And because it's an artist book, there was a lot of pressure to like make it actually a book. And so I decided to try to actually glean the information off the original film strip. And to do that, all of these old boom boxes had to be dragged up from the basement of this art center. And huge amounts of double D batteries were involved. So we eventually played the tapes and transcribed them. They eBayed this old film projector in order to project the film and set up a DSLR camera to document the slides. And so with the images from the film about paper and the audio from the film on paper, I built it into an artist book that basically is just the entire presentation into a book form. And because this whole thing is an artist book, what's exciting to me is that it's actually being collected back into libraries and special collections, rare art book rooms. So this is the the search engine at the Hunt Library here at CMU. And I love the idea of these things getting to exist as sculptures to look at and preserved and protected and cared for as archived special objects that were just discarded and forgotten about. And then the last, and then of course, because this beautiful film projector is so extremely good looking, and I'm very obsessed with the mechanical industrial age of technology, because there were still like knobs and gears and you could still really see how it works. I had to make this out of paper. And so a few shots of my process, which is all just hand tailored pieces, often using sort of screen printing for the graphics and text, building all the knobs, and the final sculpture. And I do think a lot about as our technology becomes more digital and more nano and micro, and how uncomplicated they are as objects, will they make not as interesting of a sculpture? Open-ended question for the discussion. Okay, so the last project I wanted to share today is a project that was sponsored by the studio here. It's the making of the world's first paper facsimile of the world's oldest blue LED. So I did a residency at the Sarnoff collection, which is RCA's corporate archive. And what you're looking at here is the world's first blue LED, a prototype made in 1972 by Herbert Paul Maruska. And it was the first time that someone was able to get the light to glow blue. I knew I had to make a copy of this because it was such a handmade prototype. This is a little picture from the archive. Will the blue LEDs ever make Maruska a rich man? Before this invention could really take off, RCA closed, went bankrupt, closed down. They didn't continue supporting this invention, and the momentum behind this disappeared. And it wasn't until 1990s where a trio of Japanese engineers designed the LED light that would ultimately win them the Nobel Prize in Physics just a few years ago. But they all cite Maruska as the original inventor of the blue LED. So in order to make this, the curator at the Sarnoff collection sent me pictures of the machine and also a wonderful drawing of all of the dimensions of the blue LED. This is my first paper prototype. I got to play with conductive ink, screen printing inks, to see if I could power the light with just the 3-volt coin battery. And this was the sort of final prototype that it could power from just a small battery as a portable sculpture. But I had an interest in building it into a much larger sculpture, one that utilized some programming in order to blink the lights in code to actually in Morse code in order to sort of speak a story. An interest to make it sort of a far bigger impact maybe than this smaller single sculpture, and with varied results. So here are some pictures of attempting to make that sculpture. So lots of paper screws, paper knobs, hand-drawn masking tape arrows, ultimately building about 60 of these sculptures. In order to make them be programmable of Morse code, I had to hardwire in these Arduino Nanos to code the lights, which I've never done. So here's all of the wired sculptures. If you wire to power the nanos, I needed electricity, which is something that, as you know, with the outlets, I don't often engage with. And because there was hard wires and electricity, then I needed to build a shelf in order to hide the cords. And I was not very good at soldering, so there's a lot of soldering in the gallery. And finally, the work works, and lights blink in Morse code. And in order to ship them or carry them, I had to build these custom boxes. And finally, the final piece in the exhibition. So what you're looking at is about 60 copies of the blue LED, each programmed to speak one letter in Morse code. And what they spell is a famous quote by David Sarnoff, the chairman of RCA at the time, which was, "Competition brings out the best in products and the worst in people." And I think so much about that quote in my own practice, in that I want to do the opposite. I want to make really bad products that don't do anything, that don't have any function, but maybe are the best in the human ability to make by hand or to create. So this is like my anti-quote. But all is to say, all of that work with the soldering and the electricity, I took the original prototype that was just powered by a 3-volt battery, brought it back to the museum, placed it on the shelf next to the original blue LED light, and it eventually just lost its juice, and together they were just two lights that once shined blue. And I do think in that simple gesture of the one-to-one and just the giving back, the work is at its strongest. We're gonna watch a short, oh, there is audio. Hopefully the tech wizards can make the audio play. I forgot about this.
You would have had to have shared it. If you want to stop the slides and then reshare it in your Zoom.
Okay, sorry, because this video is so good. How do I?
Button. There should be a little button that says share with audio in the lower left.
Okay. Share sound. Sorry, y'all.
All right. All right. Is it time? All right. All right. Is it time? Go. Okay. The first.
Boy, I hope it lights up.
You and me both. I think we all are hoping that it lights up. But it lit up before, so hopefully it'll light up again.
Okay.
So, box contains 22.5 volt battery, available from Radio Shack. Check. Make sure that the white toggle switch on the top is set to 22. Before we begin operation, Jonathan, I think we need to make sure the polarity of the diode is right. We need to make sure that it's plugged into the right sockets here.
The longer wire is the positive.
You want me to unplug it and see whether that's so?
No. Oh, we shouldn't. Wait a second. The tab is supposed to point towards the one that's on the box.
That is correct. That is where it's pointing now.
And
yes.
it's in the right holes?
Yes, it
All
is.
right, if that's the case, then there's a 3 toggle switch on the top of the box, which I assume means this one here.
No, this is a 3 position on the top.
Well, it could be, okay.
This is side.
All right. All right, so toggle that to 1.
1.
Okay.
Yeah. Because one is the socket.
Right.
Yep.
Select socket 1, and it's marked as such.
All right.
And then also, there's a 3-position toggle switch
On the side.
of the
There
box.
it is, yeah.
Has to be set to plus.
Okay.
Set to plus.
Set to plus.
It is.
All right.
I didn't get anything.
Oh dear.
Maybe the battery's got no voltage.
Or maybe there's something wrong with the connection. I mean,
All right.
there's a lot of possibilities here.
All right.
Yeah, well, another thing to do is to pull it out of its socket, attach the wires directly.
Well, do you want me to connect it up and run it off the power supply now with a...
Well, you might as well, because it's no fun if it doesn't light up.
I agree.
We've darkened the lights a little bit
Yeah.
here in the room.
And now I'm going to start ramping up my power supply.
Slowly, Jonathan.
Yeah. We're up to about 20 some odd volts, and we're drawing no current. That's the problem. We're not drawing any current. So,
Ooh.
so the ammeter is reading zilch, Oh, just a minute. There was a wire not connected.
That would explain it.
I'm sorry. We had a wire not connected.
Okay.
Hold on a minute. Hold on a minute. Sorry about that.
All right, let's try this again.
All right, I'm going to run you up again. Yes, we're drawing current. We are drawing current. We've got a couple of milliamps here.
We got it.
It's lighting faintly.
You got to see this. We've got blue. It's glowing.
It's glowing.
That is definitely blue.
Yep.
That is beautiful.
Yeah, we've got 3 milliamps.
That is amazing.
You want
After all these years.
Is she muted? We may have lost your sound. We may have, we may have lost your sound. So there's a small technical glitch. Eiman, I think you may have lost your sound. Can you hear me? I think you may have switched which one your microphone is on. Take a look at your microphone signal and your microphone, and maybe fiddle with your. If you click on the.
How about now?
Yes.
Okay. It's weird. Okay.
We hear you now,
Okay.
and please pick up from just after you showed the video of the guys getting the blue light to light up.
Great. Okay, so the blue light lights up. I have the there's like 3 more slides. I have because I make multiples and because a part of my practice is always about sharing, I ended up sending that light back to Herbert in Florida. And he wrote back, "Dear Professor Yay, what a pleasant surprise the other day when the postman delivered your box. I'm happy to report that the paper replica arrived in perfect condition and now sits on the shelf in my office. It is an exact replica of the original." I think that idea of a gift, of the one-to-one, of the copy that is worth preserving, even though it has no more function, is some of the magic of my work. And in that gesture, I always have a gift at the end of my presentation. So a brand new sculpture for everyone here. It's available in the zine as part of the festival's downloadable giveaways, and also on my website. This is a paper watch copy of an illustration from a 1981 Byte magazine cover of a future computer wrist computer. And so on the right is the paper sculpture. On the zine and also on my website, you can download the pattern and the bits in order to make the watch. You can see on my website, I have a whole series of downloadable art projects for which I would love to share with you all and get. I always love like DM images of the sculptures being made. And then I'm gonna not share the screen anymore. Oops. and then just quickly show you that it's a real watch in real life, and you can just slap it right there on your wrist and try not to do anything all day because you'll break it, and that's it.
Eiman, thank you so much for the present of the downloadable watch that is in our zine. It's on the cover of our zine, and
Oh, cool.
if you folks go to the conference website under zine, you'll see Eiman's page where you can print it out and put it together. I mean, we have a lot of really great questions coming up on deck here. I personally love and really admire how your work is in dialogue with technology, and how there's a kind of alchemical quality to the hand making of these things, that making something that's seemingly banal, like an electrical outlet or an iPhone charger, becomes kind of imbued with something incredibly special because of your labor and it's suddenly remarkable when you make it by hand as opposed to it being in some factory. One question is, how does making this kind of work affect your own relationship to these pieces of technology that you're recreating? Like, do you feel like you have a closer relationship to them because you know them so intimately, or is there an element of criticality in remaking them in such a useless way?
Yeah, I think a little bit of both. But the big thing with like the paper film was like everyone's like, "Did you watch the film?" I'm like, "I don't care about the film. I cared about the foam, and this receipt that lasted that somehow made it through like almost 40 years. And the same thing with that film projector. It's like, I guess I think it's such a beautiful formal object, and in the paper version, that's a display thing. And so it's like a fetishizing of the industrial design of it, the history of it, you know. But then once I make the paper copy, I almost don't care about the original, which is like a dangerous thing. But I started my presentation with that floppy 3.5 floppy disk, and that actually I'll like show it here. Oh, will it adjust? Yeah. And this is like exactly to measurement, but I love this that like somehow Tucker kept his floppy disk for like 30 some years and found it in a drawer. And so I wrote to him, I was like, I'll make you a paper one as art, and then you won't be like a weirdo keeping like technology that doesn't work anymore, but you can like keep it as a sculpture. And so I think that kind of gets to the like sense of humor with it, or just the love of the object, but not the like usefulness that it has, I guess.
Got another, thank you. Another couple questions. One is, could you talk more about the instructable, for lack of a better word, aspect of your work, or the interactive aspect, the publishing of the templates that people could make it themselves, the sharing, the making. What led you to that? You started making these beautiful things yourself, and then suddenly you're publishing them so that people can make them themselves. Mm-hmm. What led to that shift, and how has that sort of changed your thinking about your practice?
Sure. Well, actually, the mahjong set is basically the first paper sculpture I ever made, and it was always, the original idea was always that it was a downloadable version, right? So it was always like, yeah, you want an original, handmade, authentic, real mahjong set, then make it yourself. And so the practice always existed as a giveaway, and then slowly kind of moved towards, I got 5 years ago a chance to show that work at the Contemporary Jewish Museum, and then it made a fancy sculpture version, and now it exists where there's sort of both happening at the same time. The downloadable PDFs have been this idea that like whatever job you work, you can always steal some paper from the printer. And so I used to, like, when I had more boring office jobs, I'd like look up free, like there's so many free craft projects out there, and then you could just like skim a little paper off the copier and then make work. So I wanted to like make stuff so people could like not do work at work. And I have a whole, so that's that impulse of the free, and I love because there's so much like fan stuff, and there's like a lot of fan art out there, and there's a lot of like food objects. I like that these are really like kind of useless pattern. I mean, like, who is someone really going to make 144 pieces, and one of my favorite sculptures that is a giveaway is like an orange peel, and it's just this, like an orange peel for the ground. I think it's like might be my best work, but it's like, it isn't a paper craft that you want to make unless you want to make it. It's a sculpture. It's like an artwork. That's a free paper craft. Yeah.
What you're saying connects to one of the earlier speakers, Max Bitker, who said he makes things for people who are bored at work. And I think Evan Roth is another artist who's talked about the sort of the bored at work audience.
Yeah.
The last question is there a machine you'd like to make in paper that you haven't made yet? I know that the wristwatch was one, but do you have one that you're sort of like you're plotting because it's even more preposterous?
There's so many. I got a tour of like the server at the Carnegie Museum, like the basement server. I'd love to do like those things are so beautiful with all the crazy cords and lights and stuff. I'll just like throw it out there that like that. I'd love the iPhone thing was this impulse of a scale, right? Like a everyday little thing at a scale that was so sort of formal in its line and its shape and its shadow. And there's something about that in like the hidden technology that makes all of the stuff look virtual and wireless and free. So that's like a dream thing. It's endless, and so all of these things are just like I'm like building up my repertoire of like buttons and knobs and chords, so I'm just more in shape for that opportunity. Yeah.
When you get the big commission,
Yeah.
to reproduce a server rack with all those wires coming out.
Yeah.
With that, I need to conclude this talk, and I'm just going to give a quick little note to the audience following about what's happening this afternoon. At 5 o'clock, Leah Beakley and Nani Chacon will be presenting. The presentation after that will be at 6 o'clock. If you didn't catch it earlier, unfortunately, Olivia Michaela Ross has had to cancel. Something's pulled her away. But we'll see you at 5 o'clock for Leah Beakley and Nani Chacon. And Eiman, I want to thank you again so much. And for all the speakers who are in this session, Ari Malenciano and Sarah Rosalina Brady, thanks everyone. And we'll see you at 5. All right. Bye.
Bye.